Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is the last video on the themes in Macbeth, and we're going to cover two very important topics: masculinity and cruelty, and kingship versus tyranny. At the time this play was written, society was incredibly restrictive regarding gender roles, and Macbeth reflects this in many ways, particularly through the link between masculinity and cruelty. Manliness is displayed through violence and stoicism, and the characters who do not adhere to these stereotypes often have their manhood questioned, or are labelled as cowards. Of course, a good example of this is in Act 1, Scene 7, where Macbeth is hesitating to go through with King Duncan's murder. Lady Macbeth targets his masculinity in order to persuade him to do the deed. She says, "When you durst do it, then you were a man, and to be more than what you were, you would be so much more the man." This is an easy way to manipulate Macbeth, because as a soldier he is often praised for his courage in battle, another trait which is linked to masculinity. Since it is his wife who is accusing him of cowardice, he must match her ruthless behaviour, or risk looking weaker than a woman, which would have been shameful at the time. It seems that conversations about masculinity often appear before acts of violence, because when Macbeth hires assassins to kill his friend Banquo in Act 3, Scene 1, he asks them, "Do you find your patience so predominant in your nature that you can let this go? Are you so gospel to pray for this good man and for his issue whose heavy hand hath beggared yours for ever?" They respond to this saying, "We are men, my liege." This suggests that qualities such as patience and forgiveness are not considered manly, and the preferred course of action is brutal revenge. However, Macduff presents a slightly more progressive view of masculinity in Act 4, Scene 3, after learning of his family's murder at the hands of Macbeth. He has an understandably emotional outburst, to which Malcolm says, "Dispute it like a man." He replies, "I shall do so, but I must also feel it as a man." Macduff seems to understand that men are also allowed to express their emotions without it being considered womanly. However, a few lines later he exclaims, "Oh, I could play the woman with mine eyes and braggart with my tongue," which once again links women with tears and weakness. It would be impossible to discuss masculinity in this play without also mentioning how it affects the audience's view of women. Interestingly, the main female characters, Lady Macbeth and the witches, are just as disposed towards cruelty as the men, if not more so. However, to a Shakespearean audience, this would distinguish them as villains, because they would be going against the stereotypical ideal of a soft and gentle woman. When Lady Macbeth asks the spirits to "unsex me here and fill me top full of direst cruelty," she believes she needs to rid herself of her femininity in order to be ruthless and cruel, and her husband shares a similar view, saying, "Bring forth men-children only, for thy undaunted mettle should compose nothing but males." While tenacity and ruthlessness were seen as ideal traits for a man, they were not considered attractive qualities in women, and this is apparent in the way that the male characters behave. When Duncan's body is discovered in Act 2, Scene 3, Macduff says to Lady Macbeth, "'Tis not for you to hear what I can speak. The repetition in a woman's ear would murder as it fell." He assumes that, as a woman, she is unable to stomach acts of violence, which is ironic because only moments before, her hands were covered in the king's blood. Check out this character analysis video for a more in-depth look at Lady Macbeth. Although these women are plenty capable of cruelty, it is important to note that none of them seem to be able to kill. Even the witches, as supernatural entities with strange powers, are not, as far as we know, capable of taking a life. In Act 1, Scene 4, one of the witches describes her encounter with a shipman's wife, who refused to share her chestnuts, so she takes revenge on her husband, saying, "I'll drain him dry as hay, sleep shall neither night nor day hang upon his penthouse lid, he shall live a man forbid. Though his bark cannot be lost, yet it shall be tempest-tossed." The witches are able to make this man impotent, unable to sleep, and conjure storms to toss the ship he is on, but she also says his bark, or boat, cannot be lost, meaning that she cannot actually sink the vessel and kill the shipman. Lady Macbeth is also unable to kill King Duncan, as she says that he resembled her father as he slept. This shows that while the women in this play have as cruel intentions as the men, there is still an impression put forward that only men are capable of violence and murder. Despite this old-fashioned point of view, the connection between masculinity and cruelty is at least portrayed as a destructive one, which leads to war and chaos within Scotland that is only resolved once the rightful King Malcolm declares peace. When studying this theme, it is important to give some historical context, so that we can understand Shakespeare's intentions when writing this play. In the early 1600s, James I, the former King of Scotland, had just been crowned King of England after the death of Queen Elizabeth, who had not produced an heir to the throne. Soon afterwards, he survived an assassination attempt, which is now famously known as the Gunpowder Plot, from a small faction who wanted to replace him with a Catholic ruler. Because James I also happened to be the patron of Shakespeare's theatre company, it is more than likely that this play was written for two reasons. First, to emphasize the terrible consequences of regicide and challenging divine right, and second, so that James I would understand the difference between a good king and a tyrant through the examples of King Duncan and Macbeth. If you're finding this video helpful so far, please give us a like, it really helps out the channel. The commonly held belief of what a good king should be is outlined by Malcolm, the rightful heir to the throne, in Act 4, Scene 3. He describes the king becoming graces as justice, verity, temperance, stableness, bounty, perseverance, mercy, lowliness, devotion, patience, courage, fortitude. This long list of virtues would be hard for any man to live up to, but King Duncan seems to embody all of them. He is the divinely appointed rightful king, so at the time people believed that God had entrusted him to rule their country. He appears to take this responsibility seriously, and puts his duties to his country above all selfish pursuits, saying to his men in Act 1, Scene 4, "Signs of nobleness like stars shall shine on all deservers." This means that he values noble qualities in his subjects, such as bravery and loyalty, and rewards them for it. Macbeth benefits from this generosity as Duncan says, "No more that Thane of Cawdor shall deceive our bosom interest. Go pronounce his present death, and with his former title, greet Macbeth." His promotion is due to his bravery in the battlefield which brought about the former Thane's defeat. But there is a lot of dramatic irony in the king's words, as the new Thane of Cawdor is even more treacherous than the last. Macbeth accepts this title, saying, "The service and loyalty I owe, in doing it, pays itself. Your Highness's part is to receive our duties, and our duties are to your throne and state." Although the words coming out of Macbeth's mouth describe the perfect relationship between royal and subject, as the audience we know that he is already fantasizing about securing the king's position. So by appointing two unworthy men to the same title, we can see that for all of Duncan's good traits, he is gullible and unable to tell the difference between true loyalty and a facade. Nonetheless, he is still an ideal ruler and is referred to as sainted, gracious, and great king by his subjects. Even Macbeth, who is plotting to kill him, has to admit that "this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off." Unfortunately, this is not enough to stop him from carrying out the murder and taking the throne for himself. Although he is dead, King Duncan is still described in connection with God and divinity. When Macduff discovers his body, he cries out, "Most sacrilegious murder hath broke ope the Lord's anointed temple and stolen thence the life of the building." It would have been absolutely unthinkable to the other nobles that someone could have the audacity to commit such a terrible crime, and the repercussions of this act are reflected in nature. Lennox, one of the king's thanes, notes that he heard "strange screams of death. Some say the earth was feverous and did shake." Additionally, in Act 2, Scene 4, Macduff's cousin Ross and an old man converse about the strange events following Duncan's death. They discuss a parallel occurrence where a mighty falcon was hunted and killed by a mousing owl, which was usually considered to be a lesser bird. Even stranger, the king's horses were said to have broken loose and eaten each other. The old man says, "'Tis unnatural, even like the deed that's done." Through these signs and omens, Shakespeare seems to suggest that the absence of a rightful king affects not only the citizens of that country, but the natural order as well. The source of all this chaos is Macbeth, who finally achieves his goal of kingship, but turns out to be a far less successful ruler than Duncan. At the beginning of the play, he displays at least some of the king-becoming graces that Malcolm refers to. He is called brave, valiant, and worthy gentleman by Duncan and his fellow soldiers. However, the temptation of the crown leads him down a dark path that slowly consumes any virtues he may have begun with. So by the time he ascends the throne, he is completely different to the person he once was. Unlike King Duncan, his actions are purely to benefit himself, not his country, and because of this, he does not inspire loyalty or love from his subjects. In Act 5, Scene 2, it is said of Macbeth that those he commands move only in command, nothing in love. Because of the widely held belief in divine right, supporting Macbeth would be wrong for both political and religious reasons, so it is not surprising that Macduff and many of the other nobles from the former king's court desert him and end up fighting on the side of the rightful heir, Malcolm. In stark contrast to Duncan, Macbeth is rarely referred to as a king, but rather as accursed, Black Macbeth, devil, and most often, tyrant. Unsurprisingly, his death is not treated as a tragedy, but as the end of a reign of terror. The play ends with Duncan's son Malcolm being crowned the King of Scotland, and although he is still young, he seems to possess many of the qualities which make a good king. There is an atmosphere of hope and relief because peace has finally been restored after the chaos of Macbeth's rule. Through the opposing concepts of kingship and tyranny, Shakespeare clearly indicates what is expected of a country's ruler, and warns against upsetting the natural order established by divine right. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more content. See you next time!